Gone somewhere and dyed my hair now. Wanna be alone. It's much to bear and you don't care, and I wanna play alone. I got you in my sight. I keep all of what you said to me. I get you, get you, get you, get you on your knees. Rewrite all the things you said that I should be. I'll get you, get you, get you. Now you beg me, please. Hey.
Hey, everybody. Put a one in the chat if you can hear me. Sorry, I was having issues with Streamlabs. Ugh. I love it and I hate it. I love it when it works, which is 90% of the time, but when it doesn't, it is stubborn. So, obviously, we're going to get into Summer Wells. She went missing on June 15th, 2021, allegedly around, I would assume 5:30 onward. 911 was called at 6:30 p.m. roughly. And that's really all that we have as a solid piece of information from law enforcement. Hey, Dumplings, Grammy, Nay, nay. Now watch me whip. Good to see you. Go ahead and hit that like button while you're here. And if you're new here, I love case studies. I have gone over case studies and have used them in multiple different missing children cases as a comparison tool. And this one that I'm going to use, it is called False Alleged Abductions Reported in regards to missing children. All right, so here is the case study. Now, a lot of people who are not on the same page as me in certain cases roll their eyes when they see this because, of course, not every missing child's case pertains to any kind of suspicion of people directly around the child. However, the statistics are that it usually is. So I think that it's more appropriate to look at cases, especially missing children cases, and rule the most statistical chance out if you can, right? Just as like the basis so that we don't harp on the same thing over and over again in the on the YouTubes and social media, especially because, families and people around the families are victims if they in fact are not complicit in the child going missing or knowledge or whatever it may be. Hey, Nico, good to see you. So Summer Wells, a lot of people would agree that the majority of folks out there think that either one or both parents conspired and know what happened to Summer Wells. That is, I think it's pretty obvious that if you were to take everybody who had thoughts about what happened to Summer, the majority would lie with the parents had something to do with it, or they have knowledge, or one of them does, or the grandmother does. So let's look at the false allegation of child abduction. Okay, and again, I've used this in multiple different cases that I've covered. Not to mention, although it is helpful, that the FBI uses this and produces this in their, or the DOJ, which is the department of the FBI. They use this too. False allegation of child abduction. And the reason why I'm using this one specifically, it's because if it is a predator abduction or anything outside of this false allegation of child abduction, there is no evidence or anything that the police have given us so far to analyze anything, right? But since everyone is already analyzing the potential of false claims of summer being taken, we're going to go here, right? Hey, Matthew. Hope you had a good Father's Day. Good to see you. So, the Behavioral Analysis Unit obviously has used this and has produced this from through the DOJ. And we all know about that behavioral analysis and the victimology that we have heard from Chris Madonna, which everybody has their own opinions on. But I'm just using him as a reference that this is something that he references a lot. So it shouldn't be uncommon to those who follow me, right? So the Behavioral Analysis Unit is a component of FBI National Center for the Analysis of Violent Crime Unit, which provides behavioral-based investigative and operational support to law enforcement. We've heard this before. This is probably not new. But what they do is they look into the behavioral-based side of the investigation into missing and abducted children, child homicides, SA victims, and other criminal acts targeting these children. All right. You would hear the CART team, right? The Rapid Response Child Abduction Team. They are part of that too. I'm sure that they get together and brainstorm, and probably more than likely, their work is within this article that Miss Kathleen Canning, which I've been in email communications with her over time to try to get an updated case study that she has done, and she is working on it. It's just, you know how it goes. Election years really do affect a lot of things, especially in education, right? You don't know where you're going to get your funding from, depending on what president you have. It's really a thing. So I have not seen an updated version so far. I believe she's probably trying, though, from the last conversation we had. So Kathleen Canning is a professional. She's a professor who teaches forensics and information about specifically crimes against targeted victims. Okay. She is well known in her area of study, and there was also other contributors to this. So what is this? Okay, let's just break it down. The interesting thing real quick about this false allegation of child abduction, it's specifically talking about a child abduction cover-up where the perpetrators are using the abduction theory as the forefront of what they are trying to make you believe happened, to cover up their own direct involvement in the murder of a child. All right. This is very specific, very difficult to find. But when I did find it, I was mind blown, because this is exactly what we need if we're going to have an opinion on these missing children cases, and then also target or have an opinion on the parents or family members. So again, this is about cases in which a child has been falsely reported as missing or abducted. All right. Because they are extremely challenging to law enforcement agencies responsible for the investigation, which we all know. Obviously, it's been 3 years since Summer Wells has been taken away from her home, right? In some form or fashion. Michael Vaughn, Oakley Carlson, Harmony Montgomery was part of this, not part of this case study, but she falls into this category, and you'll see why here in a minute. Cody Bixby, etc. Sebastian Rogers will even potentially fall into this. However, statistically, he is not the average age of a false allegation of child abduction where the parents and or family members murder their children. Okay. So I'm not saying that this study is referencing that anybody is guilty of anything. This is for entertainment purposes only, as I have to say, like everyone else. This is for research and educational purposes. All right. So in the absence of a witness abduction or an obvious crime scene, it's difficult to determine whether a child has actually been abducted or has become a victim of a homicide and a false allegation. I do have videos on this that summarizes it. The purpose of the study was to examine falsely alleged kidnapping cases and identify successful investigative strategies. So this was specifically designed to help law enforcement figure out, where do we get it wrong? What are we missing when this happens, when this is the actual case? Because, as we know, it takes a long time in these missing children's cases that have suspicious circumstances involved in it. So 61 false allegation cases involving 66 victims were analyzed. The average age of the victim was 5 years old. So we do know that Summer Wells was 5 years old when she went missing. She falls under the average age of this case study, which again is why I'm covering it. So back in 2011, they knew 5-year-olds were targets of being a victim. All right. They did the age between newborn and 17 years old. So for the average to be 5 years old, we obviously know that being a toddler, with certain circumstances with the parents or family members or caretakers, increased risk. Hey, Matt, thank you for becoming a member. I will return the favor, sir. I promise you. Hey, this ain't my first month. It's all right. We'll pretend that it says since the beginning. All right. So, victims came from generally unstable, high-risk family situations and were killed primarily by biological parents. So some of these cases involved, grandparents or aunts, mostly biological parents. But that is very alarming, right? And it makes me think that sometimes we overlook the fact that parents could be in other cases. A lot of people say, don't assume anything, which is correct. You should not assume that someone is guilty of a crime that they have no charges against. However, they are not free from scrutiny, just like anybody in this free speaking world is not free from scrutiny. But we do need to be careful. And I have learned my lesson on, disrespect versus being candid about things. So again, I am not saying that anybody is guilty of anything. We're just reviewing the data. So why were they murdered? Primarily by their biological parents in this case study. They were killed because they were unwanted or viewed as an obstacle to a desired goal. And there are multiple reasons for that. So they were unwanted or viewed as an obstacle or desired goal. When we go through this, you're going to see that goals range from a lot of different things, okay? Like a lot of different things. Whether that be avoiding maybe CPS, avoiding something from being uncovered, or the child saw something that they weren't supposed to. And so things like that. But the biggest reason is not really shocking to me, but maybe to others, is that they were troubled. They were troubled and too much to handle. And abuse, whether it be it never happened before or it had been happening for a long time, the average, I think, is 45% of the time they had been abused over time, which is very low in my opinion. But it still goes back to the fact that one instance of fatal abuse towards the child for a very stressful reason, whatever that may be, is the primary reason for that. Or they were victims of abuse and maltreatment that ended in fatality, which is what I was just saying. All right. Which is very sad to me. So when you're thinking, in my mind, when we're thinking about, well, there's no proof or signs of abuse over time, right? Am I still alive? Does everybody still hear me? Let me know, because my stuff is acting funky. My Streamlabs. Put a 1 in the chat if you can still hear me. Hey, Mr. Eve. I think you can hear me. Okay, good deal. Awesome. I can't tell, like, it literally doesn't tell me if I'm live. Awesome. So when you're thinking about, well, there's no signs of abuse, the child looks great. They live in a nice home in Hendersonville, Tennessee, perhaps. Yes, they might have their struggles and issues, but everything seems to look normal. Well, normal can end in a minute, in a second, in a millisecond. Because if that one instance of neglect happened, and you have, let's say, other children in the home that you're trying to protect, or you want to keep the family unit together, it skews the data, right? A little bit, depending on what happened. But there are consistencies in this, which is past similar behavior, charges, drug use, alcoholism, right? And we'll get into that. But again, the average age is 5 years old. And that's why this study is very important to go over with specifically Summer Wells, right? So we all know that there's an immediate response, or should be an immediate response, when a child goes missing, and then there's talk about an abduction, right? They're time sensitive, resources sensitive, and depending on the law enforcement agency, before FBI gets there, things need to be done as methodical as possible, right? And we see that doesn't happen all the time, obviously. But we also don't know the full scope of what they've done. Sometimes we act like we know everything that had happened on the first day and the second day. And we don't. I think we scrutinize police a little too hard on that. However, if a child's case is going cold or seems to be going cold, scrutiny is necessary, right? So let me skip down here to this part right here. In the first modern study of filicide, which is a parent killing a child, they found that of the 126 victims where the age was known, 67% were 3 years of age and younger. So the younger you are with filicide specifically, again, parent killing a child, the younger you are, there's a risk. There's a higher risk. So between 3 to 5, very intense time for parents to be more stable, because children are learning their independence. They're talking back. Potty training issues, and you'll hear that soon, can be an issue, especially if a parent doesn't want to deal with that for some reason. That was the breaking or tipping point for Harmony Montgomery's piece of shit father, if you want to call him a father, murderer, her murderer. That was the tipping point of her beating where she died. Okay. Potty training issues. And my point that I always like to say about that is, people who are on drugs, every little thing that gets in the way of that is an issue for them. Potty training would be a big issue for a drug user, because they have to clean it up. It's stinky. They have to actually have some effort and teach the child, right? They don't want to do that. So I think potty training issues is so overlooked I really do. In these missing child cases, around 3 to 5. So younger children are very dependent and they compete for attention, affection, resources. So when a parent or other caregiver is involved in the death of a child, the homicide may be disguised or alleged to have been an accident. How many times have we heard that? Hey, Kiki, good to see you, love. This false claim of abduction provides a means to explain the disappearance of the child and shift that focus of the investigation toward that unknown abductor or kidnapper and away from the parent or caregiver. It also serves to preserve the image of the ill-fated good parent, garnering sympathy and attention, not unlike that of Munchausen syndrome by proxy. And there's a reason why they're mentioning this is because that was one of the methods to explain this at trial for one of the parents who murdered their children. Okay. It's ridiculous. Hey, Ert, good to see you. Ert's been working really hard over there on her channel. Definitely check her out. She's been doing good things, calling out the bad behavior. So this is a big one for me. It also serves to preserve the image of the ill-fated good parent. So for instance, in Summer Wells' case, both, because they're both looked at as the worst, right? Garnering sympathy and attention. Have we seen that in the Summer Wells case? Yes. We have seen a lot of things where I've been treated unfairly. What about me? This doesn't help me in regards to Summer's mother. If we want to pull up the Dr. Phil interview, we can to show that. Put a 1 in the chat if you want me to do that. But that's what it's talking about, in my opinion. Right? So law enforcement challenges, I think it's pretty obvious that if you don't have the evidence to direct them to exactly what happened and the parents are lying about it or not being forthcoming and they can't prove it otherwise, how are you going to have any direction as to what happened to that child? I mean, that's pretty much the summary, in my opinion, of how challenging it could be and is. So it says here, law enforcement investigators are forced to rely primarily on subjective assessments of whether the reporting party is being truthful. Because that's their basis. So what is Summer Wells' mother? What is her statement? And what is Dawn Wells' statement? Well, we know that Candace says, I was helping, Summer Wells is helping Grandma put the groceries up. She comes back out. Grandma says, I gave her a piece of candy. Then she says, I want to go watch or go play with my toys or go hang out with my brothers. She goes inside. Candace watches her walk into the house. About 5 minutes later or some change, she goes in and asks the boys, where's your sister? Oh, she went down to the basement to go play with her toys. She hollers for Summer. She doesn't respond. She goes down to look. And Summer is gone, vanished, poof. No worries. So that is the primary information. So what do we know about that? Candace, allegedly, was the last one to see Summer, unless you want to consider the boys seeing her. If you're going to believe Candace, if you're going to believe her, then you would assume the boys. If you don't, and it's not proven, she is the last one. She would be the last one. So how hard would that be, right? For law enforcement to be like, okay, did she or did she not? Did the boys do it or not? Right, to put it on the boys. And we don't know exactly what is the real truth of the matter, right? We're not sure. But we are told to assume that the parents are telling the truth until otherwise noted, which if you want to do that on your channel, perfect. I think that you should. Here, we're going to go which is more plausible and which could be proven if it can, which obviously it can't. So the second issue is inconclusive forensic evidence, which is either absent, limited, or insufficient. Common evidence such as fingerprints, hairs, fiber, and blood is often reasonably explained by the offender as unrelated. Oh, that blood was from a nosebleed she suffers from habitually. Over the last 2 months, for some reason, she's been having nosebleeds. That's what that blood is. How are you going to know any other way forensically if you can't prove that that didn't happen, right? That's just my opinion. So I could see how it's challenging. It says a third challenge to law enforcement is often a lack of experience with this type of case. How many times have we heard we have never had a child go missing in this county or in this city, or it's been 20 years, and so law enforcement is caught with their hands tied behind their back because they literally don't know the process or procedure, which is ironically why this is a thing, why this case study exists in the first place. It's because law enforcement was struggling and is struggling with solving these cases. So consequently, they may find themselves unprepared to handle the task of developing a prosecutable case with little to no physical evidence. So when anybody's asking, well, why hasn't charges been brought on this, that, or the other? There you go. They don't have it. They just don't have it. Another possible challenge for law enforcement is the investigator's reluctance to confront a victim parent. Now, I highly doubt, in my opinion, that the TBI and Hawkins County Sheriff has any qualms confronting the parents. But I do understand that there are some investigators, for instance, in the D.R. Coons case, where it seems that it was very difficult to confront them because it was automatically presumed innocence before anything else until the evidence shows, right? But we know that that they are always first looked at. Parents are always looked at first. Immediate family members are always looked at first. Last to see the child is scrutinized more than anyone, or should, but it does not always happen. Hence, 20 years later, you have cold cases being solved, right? Another year, another news interview where Candace can't even show her face or plead for her daughter, Summer Wells, right? And it's your right to feel that way. I feel a little sideways about it myself. You should say something, in my opinion, but to others, it could be seen as it's just too painful. The selfishness is legitimate in this case to not say something because the pain is understandable. So I disagree. I don't think that a parent's pain negates you from getting up there and pouring your heart out and doing what you have to do for your child. That's my opinion. But I don't slight anybody for feeling the other way. I just disagree, right? Grandis, where are you? Why haven't you pled for the return of your granddaughter? Took a nap and then poof, summer is gone. Makes no sense. Yeah, I understand that. So law enforcement resources are directed towards searching for a missing victim and conducting a kidnapping investigation. So again, this was back in 2011. Things seem to have taken a change on that. It looks like law enforcement is looking at direct immediate family members more than they're not. I would assume. I can't say that for 100% certainty, but it seems to be that way because of the fact that if you've noticed in the last 3 or 4 years, like Leilani Simon, children's parents who murder their children, they're getting caught. They are getting caught. All right. And they are being prosecuted. Look at Corey Bigsby, Cody Bigsby's father. He was put in the slammy immediately for child neglect of the other children and their testimony of neglect towards Cody Bigsby. Virginia don't play. They were like, look, we have evidence that you are not a good parent to these children. And he confessed in prison, if you want to call it a confession. They haven't found him yet, but I think they will over time. I do. It just might be a little later than we wanted. But they're getting caught, is my point. It's getting better, I guess. So again, they're reluctant to confront a reporting person who may be exhibiting all the signs of a grieving and an emotionally upset parent. For instance, an accident happens. You're the parent. An accident happens right in front of your eyes where you were absolutely neglectful. You probably are going to serve some time for whatever happened, whether it be a fatal overdose, your drugs were laying out in the open and they ingested it. You have other children to take care of. You don't want to lose them or your entire life and be shamed. So what do we do? What do we do? Those are, some of the examples. So, of course, even though it's your fault, right? And you did something and there's an accident and you have to get rid of this poor child that you love, but you were negligent and you did everything else right. Except for that day. Except for that day, you were extremely negligent and you think you deserve not to go down for that crime. So you start the cover-up process, right? Of course, they're going to be grieving, right? They're going to be absolutely devastated, even though they're covering for negligent homicide of their child, right? I just have to be straightforward about it. So how could you, as a law enforcement investigator, if you're a sensitive one, confront this bawling, squalling mess? Because you're a parent too. You're an investigator with children and you understand that this is normal behavior. So it's even harder. It would be hard for some. So I get that. One of the most difficult challenges in these cases is that victims' bodies are often well hidden, enhancing the charade of a missing victim and delaying their discovery. So if they know, if one or both parents or caregiver, they know exactly where they are and they know it's almost impossible to get to, or they know that it's going to take some time and they can still move the body if they need to, if investigators are getting close. That's still a lot of time for the investigators to have to figure out, depending on where that body is. So delays in body recovery allow what limited evidence may be present to decompose, deteriorate, or vanish entirely. Makes a lot of sense, right? So the scope of these victims, they were under 18. They were reported by to a law enforcement agency as missing or having been abducted. At the time of the report, the victim had already been killed or had been left for dead. So there was instances of 2 children who were left for dead, which is even worse in my mind than I don't believe they thought they were alive, but still, that's horrible. It's awful. At the time of the report, the reporting party knew or believed that the victim was dead and knew that the victim was not actually missing, obviously, or it wouldn't be a false abduction, reported abduction. And the case was adjudicated, meaning served, meaning charges were brought. Scroll over, we know about NCMEC. That's basically where they got their data from, which is where we get our data from whenever a child goes missing and want to go look at the flyers, right? So let's look at the victimology, as Chris Medina likes to say. Victim characteristics. The total number of victims in this sample was 66. The average age, again, was 4.5 years, closer to 5, with the median age at 3.5. So again, 3.5 to 4.5 or 5 is high risk for false reported abductions. There were slightly more female victims than male, with 44% male and 56% female, which is slight to me, right? It's not very much. 70% were white, with an additional 18% African American, 8% Hispanic, and 4% biracial. So the victim characteristics of primary importance, all right, when evaluating the legitimacy, sorry, I need to have a drink of water, of reported abduction. Victims of actual non-family abductions are significantly more likely to be women. Victims of actual non-family abductions, Elizabeth Smart, right? Those normal cases where a 12-year-old girl, 13, 14, is abducted out of their bedroom, the more statistical. Because that motivation is usually SA, right? The average age of non-family child abduction is 11 years. The victim characteristics in this study mirror those which found that children younger than 4 are at greatest risk of severe injury or death by parents or caregivers. And let's just say a 4-year-old or a 5-year-old rather is a little slightly delayed because of maltreatment, neglect, learning issues, or learning disabilities. So they mimic a 3 or 4-year-old. I would think that would fall into that. So more than half of the victims in this study were 4 years old or younger. Crazy to me. There were 5 cases in our study in which 2 victims, siblings or half-siblings, were murdered during the same event. They were classified as unwanted. 3 of the 5 cases were reported as a witnessed abduction, that is a carjacking, which that's kind of like a outlier for me because we don't see that in Summer Wells' case. We don't even see that in Michael Vaughn's case. I haven't heard it in most recent abductions. Nobody saw anything. That's the problem. Hey, little Texas tornado. So the offender characteristics. There were 61 offenders responsible for the homicides of 66 victims. Offenders were categorized as primary and secondary according to the level of participation in the homicide. Primary offenders were directly responsible for the homicide, and then the secondary offenders assisted either in the homicide of the child or the cover-up of the child. We have to remember that a false reported alleged abduction where they know damn well what happened is a cover-up, period, the end. Most cases involved only one offender. 75% of the time, one offender was involved. Wow. So looking at Summer Wells' case, do we know if 2 parents or one parent saw her last at the same time? We know Candace tells everyone that she saw her walk into the home, right? And she went back to help Mima with her brace, or Candy. We're going to call Grandma Candy. No more Grandis. Help her with her brace, plant flowers, right? Or whatever. And then she goes back in, doesn't find Summer. So she actually falls into a more statistical chance in this study if she were complicit. Not saying she is, again. She would be more likely to be the primary offender. If anybody agrees or thinks that's the case, please put it in the comments or in the chat if you think that, if she is the primary offender, and maybe some examples of that. In my opinion, I think she is definitely the primary offender if she were to be complicit because of her behavior, what she's said and what she refuses to say, and her reactions. But she could also be innocent. So there was one case that involved 3 offenders. This one really perked me up a little bit because of the fact that there's always talk of an outside person helping, right? About half the primary offenders were men. So it's a halfsies on primary. The average age of the primary offenders in this study was 30 years old, which definitely, in this case, that's not normal because Candace is a little bit older than that, and she's 42. She was 40 at the time, I think, 39. And Dawn is way older than that. However, mentality matters. And we know, or you should know, that drugs will stunt your mental age growth. So let's say you started drugs at 21 years of age and you never stop and you're 40 years old. Your mentality is very stigmatized and hindered around that 21-year-old mindset. It is. Studies have shown it. You can research it for yourself. So that I always take into consideration. That's not in this case study. Just wanted to let everybody know that. Hey, Pointer Lover, good to see you. Hey, Mr. Happy. So, to the contrary, non-family abductions, homicides, the average age of the offenders are 28 years, which is similar. Overwhelmingly men with a motivation that was primarily SA. So that's interesting to me. So in regards to the case study, the majority of the offenders were white, 74%, 20% African American, and 5% Hispanic. Primary offenders were unemployed. So thinking back to the primary offender statistic of Candace Bly, she was unemployed, correct? I'm almost positive, correct? She was either taking care of the boys or maybe helping Don at his work here and there. But from my understanding, she was unemployed, correct? Google deleted your comment. No, not the Google. Yeah, so no job, says Nico. That's what I assumed. So Candace is not looking good in this case study, unfortunately, with primary offender, right? Not looking good. But that, again, not saying she's complicit. So because the primary offenders were unemployed in 56% of the cases, slightly over half of those education was known. So half of those unemployed, 56%, they graduated from high school. I do not know this information, and I don't really think it's relevant. Maybe it is. Maybe it is. But I think it's a little too, for us to be talking about it. That's for the investigators, right? I don't know if she did or not. If anybody knows, put it in the chat. I won't say it, but I would be interested to know that. Offender criminal history. Okay, look, it's already been put out there. It is. I'm not trying to rehash this information, but it is important. It is out there. It is public information. It is, unfortunately. So don't do the crime if you don't want the scrutiny. That's just the truth. And I even have to say that on this end, okay? Which all you're going to find on me is speeding tickets, all right? So primary offenders had a documented criminal history, either adult and or juvenile, in over half of the cases. They were adult arrests in 50% of the entire population of offenders, although their criminal histories were diverse. Half of those who had a criminal history were involved in serious offenses, including assaults, Dawn, Candace, SA, domestic violence, both Dawn and Candace, for sure. 12 had been arrested and or convicted of larceny or theft offenses. Definitely Candace, and definitely with the theft, I believe Dawn, I believe so. Correct me if I'm wrong on that. And 11 had prior alcohol or drug-related convictions. For sure, Dawn. Absolutely, Dawn. And Candace had admitted to the reason why her 2 children that she had with, I think her name is actually Candace, right? Like Candy Jr., basically, and brother Andrew, they were taken away, put in foster care and adopted out because she was on drugs, right? So we know that there is obviously a drug abuse history with both of them, even if they weren't convicted, but obviously Don was. 3 had been arrested for crimes involving some kind of deception, such as bad checks, fraud, impersonation, counterfeiting, and forgery. Definitely. I shouldn't say definitely. I believe Candace had some kind of counterfeit charge. It was a misdemeanor, but don't quote me on that. Mr. Peacock, losing your kids to the system should be on the list. Candace, the first, left her kids, Rose and Candace, to be with a woman. Candace lost her 2 older kids. Right. Mm-hmm. And Don never raised his, yeah. And his son has, Don Wells Jr. he's a RSO. Yuck, 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 yuck. So here's the table: victim versus primary offender, average age of 4.5, male 29, female 37. Now, this is what got me. So, primary offenders are female mothers. And they're a little bit older, which is really ironic to me, because you would think younger, inexperienced moms are less attentive, those kind of things, just because of age. You in your mind, or in my mind rather, age is experience and you learn things. But no. They're older than the males when they are the primary offender. Okay. Caucasian, African, we've already gone over that. So the biological mothers are the primary offenders, or the higher probability of the offender, not in relation to the father, right? Biological fathers come in second, and then step, foster, adopted fathers come in next, the mother's boyfriend. So males outside of the direct biological role. Then it's the stepfather, adoptive, or foster mother, and then aunt, family, friend. So this is very specifically targeting mom and dad, or they boyfriend and girlfriend. This is why I appreciate this so much, because they are targeting immediate, close relationships. So this figure is really interesting. It's from 1990 to 2006, the number of child homicides by age killed by strangers. So stranger is in the red, obviously higher in age from here on, acquaintance as well. But also look at the acquaintance from homicides from newborn to, look at 1 year old. Acquaintance, they knew them. So it's more statistical that either, in this case study, an acquaintance or bio mom and dad did this. And then family. Stranger is barely even on the list. And again, I want to make sure that it's these dates. But you have to remember the 90s, it was the highest crime rate ever noted. The 90s were popping, okay, with crime. It was the crime wave of the century. So it is kind of important. It's actually inflated maybe a little bit, but still, at the end of the day, family and an acquaintance is way more probable than a stranger. Strangers are rare. Very rare. So their relationships, it's very obvious. You know your child's whereabouts, right? So it's going to be easier for you to cover up if you're complicit in your child's murder, because you know their every move, right? So again, these findings replicate other child abduction homicide research in that younger victims are much more likely to be killed by family members than by non-family child abductors. So statistically speaking, these young children are being killed by their parents more so than the possibility of a stranger abduction. So when I see, and I'm not slighting anybody for this, but when I'm seeing people simp for that, what if it is that less than 1% probable chance without looking into everything with professionalism and all of that and being sensitive, even though it's a very insensitive topic to discuss with missing children and their families, it does no justice for the missing child. It really doesn't. If you're going to cover the cases, if you're going to cover it in any way, shape, or form, you have to look at everything. If you're going to talk about it, if you're going to have to discuss it within reason, right? It's doing the child no service at all to ignore things just because of a moral compass, right? That's just my opinion, though. Children are at higher risk of homicide at the very early stages of life, and again as teenagers entering adulthood, because they got a mouth on them, they got independence, they said I'm gonna do what I want, or they are under extreme scrutiny from their parents who are maybe under the influence or careless. Simps for and also not to mention that older kids can tell on you. You can't hide as well as you could at 3, 4, or 5 years old. You can't, because you're not comprehending at that age what's going on. But when you get up into that age of teenage years and you hit puberty, you see things and you know and you can comprehend and speak on it, right? So I think that's why they're saying this here. As they age and become more mobile and independent, children are victimized less often by family members and more often by acquaintances and strangers. So the more that they become mobile and do what they want to do, and they don't really need your all eyes on me, right? That's when they become victims of that or higher risk. Domestic problems. Now, this one is crucial. And then I'm going to stop here because we're almost at an hour, but I will go live again. I think we should talk about this more because, again, 3 years, they don't know what happened. They have no leads. They don't know anything except for, we don't know. But it's not a cold case. I disagree. I don't like the fact that just because tips come in, that it's not cold. So if somebody calls in a tip that says, I saw Summer, every 2 weeks, somebody says, I saw Summer, here, go look. That makes it not cold. I don't agree with it. Valid tips should be considered, not just any tips coming in. Sorry, that's just me. Domestic problems. We all know there are domestic issues in the Wells home and has had DV issues on a live stream. That is, there's no talking out of this one. But I'm not trying to be ugly to these parents, but it's the truth. As with victims of other forms of child maltreatment, the victims in this study came from resource-deprived, higher-stressed homes. The characteristics of the families in this study are consistent with child maltreatment research findings. We all know by looking at the pictures of Summer Wells that there has been some definite hygiene, neglect, and maltreatment. Her teeth were rotting. She was dirty. Now, I'm not too hard on that point, but she was habitually dirty and habitually matted hair. Her hair was nasty. A lot of the pictures that were shown. There was definite, rough housing looking, bruises and stuff. And I can't really speak on that because she could just be a rough housing child. But we obviously know that we can come to the conclusion there was not hygiene specific procedures in the house, right? Yeah, she did. I don't think it's a secret. The Centers for Disease Control identifies several risk factors for violence against children, including but not limited to poverty, which That's up for debate, right? I think Candace didn't have her own independent money, so she could be considered as living in poverty unless, uh, yeah, unless Dawn gave it to her, and that still is under poverty. That doesn't really mean that she had independence financially, so she could be considered that. Or other socioeconomic disadvantage, like I just said. History of domestic abuse, lack of family cohesion. If this isn't the most scream-worthy point, there was a lack of family cohesion. That is definitely here in this family. We've seen it. We've seen that. They don't have their children. They were taken out of the home by CPS. There is no family cohesion. The only family left is themselves, each other. And substance abuse, that is a fact. That may increase caregiver burden and parents' lack of understanding children's needs, which everybody has scrutinized Candace for sure. Other problems identified in the study include medical concerns, right? A lot of people were concerned about the well-being of Summer Wells before she got gone, right? Multiple toddlers in the same household and child custody issues. Well, there were multiple other children in the house, meaning the boys, the brothers. She was the only girl in the house, right? There was obviously issues with the oldest brother and behavior, and I'm not going to expound on that, but it had been said previously by Don himself that there were issues. There were behavioral issues. Don told people who went to Summer's day that CPS hid wearing camo and took her. Well, that's crazy. I don't know if that's true or not, but that's wild. That's wild. A little schizophrenia style. That's weird. That sounds you know what? That sounds like something Tim Mullen would say or concoct. And yes, Tim Mullen is always on my shit list. Sorry. He's sus to me. So the majority, which is 92%, big percentage here, 92% of victims' families in the study suffered from some type of domestic problem. Hello. That just launched both of the parents into at the statistical chance of within this study. That's unfortunate, right? So as of right now, in my opinion, not yours, mine, it's not looking good for specifically Candace, but both parents, Dawn and Candace. Because in addition to the above domestic problems, there was also evidence of instability within the victims' families. In 58% of the cases, there was a change in the family structure within 6 months prior to the offense. What happened? What happened in 2020? COVID. Kids weren't in school anymore, for a while at least, because COVID. Things changed. Not only COVID, but didn't someone come down named Jose and Andrew Hiltz and other people in a U-Haul? Do we remember that? And Jose was living in the house. That's a structure change. That's a definite big change, right? There was other things that went on in that house 6 months prior to her disappearance. There was a lot of court hearings. You can go look for yourself. There were a lot of things going on in that home that we probably have no idea about. But what we do know is instability, alcohol, drug abuse, domestic violence, and Dawn going to Utah for a while, taking the oldest with. I mean, there was a lot going on 6 months prior to her disappearance and further. And Jose and the crew that came down, I believe, has a big part in that chaos. That's just me. Not to mention the domestic violence issue with Jose and Dawn getting into a fight, right? Grandma Candy hurt her leg, ouch, ouch, and has never been the same since, right? Even though she hurt that thing long ago, it just didn't help, right? So, in additionally, 53% of the cases, there was a prolonged separation between the offender and the victim. Oh, well, this kind of puts Dawn in the forefront. And from what we hear, Summer would go to other people's houses. Specifically, I believe the babysitter I spoke to, she's a young thing. So I talked to her and her mother when we did the 2022 vigil when I went to Tennessee, and she was so sweet and she loved Summer very much. She probably will never be the same. Okay. But I do remember hearing that prior to 2021, she would come over all the time. And there were other people that definitely, looked after Summer. So that separation does, in some parents' minds and feelings, do change when you have that separation because you don't have the constant connected bond. And if you're doing drugs or doing whatever you want to do, you're disconnected from that responsibility. And so when it comes rushing back in, you might get a little, what's the word? Vindictive towards the child. Take it out on the child. And I'm not saying that happened here, but it's a possibility. So it says, for example, victims who lived with a separate parent, other relative, or foster home for a significant period of time prior moving back into the family unit in which they were killed appeared to be at a higher risk, further increasing the victim risk in 41% of the cases. So did Summer go to foster care for a little bit? It has been said. I don't know that for a fact, but I have heard it many times. I'm not sure. Could that have been what they're talking about here? Maybe if she did, in fact, go. I don't know. So it's just something to consider. But 41% is huge, Grandma. Yeah, absolutely. The victim had been described by the offender as being a difficult or different child and therefore potentially perceived by their caregiver as an excessive burden. She was too much. She was just too much. Right? Yeah, exactly, Gma. We just got her back. And that's exactly where I was getting to. From where? Where did she go? Who had her? Right. But we can't prove that. It's just something we can talk about. What about the child bonding with another female like Robin, right? Could that be considered a jealousy issue? It could be, but I don't see Candace getting that way. As long as somebody was doing her job for her, and this is just me, I know it sounds really hateful, but if somebody else was doing any favors for her in regards to watching or whatever with Summer, I think she was happy about that. That's just me. But I could be wrong. Maybe she is vindictive in that way and jealous. I don't know. Other people would probably say yes, though. Further increasing, let me jump down and then that's it. Absence of any mitigating factors such as supportive family or community resources. Children residing in family units exhibiting domestic problems, as documented above, are at higher risk for victimization. They would definitely fall into this category then, because we know about these. Therefore, it is not surprising that 8% of the victims in this study had official documented histories of previous physical abuse, and another 36% were reported unofficially by family, neighbors. Jody, I'm looking at you, ma'am, or other associates as previous targets of physical abuse. We have Jody screaming all day about what she saw, what she heard, what she saw, what Candace said, didn't say, what Dawn did. So if we're going to take her information and put this into the equation, she just helped launch them into this case study as potentials, right? It's just the way it is. Okay, one more, and then I swear we're going to go. Okay. Missing child report. This is so big. This is the biggest point out of the initial response from law enforcement. 71% of those cases, the victim reported the missing and alleged abducted child by the primary offender. Primary offender. So that would be Candace. Candace would fall into this category if she was the offender. Absolutely, she would, because she called. The report was made indirectly by the offender through a third person in 15% of the cases. I would really like to know if Grandma Candy called as well. I know Candace Bly called on Grammy's phone, but I'm very interested to know one day if Grandma Candy called. Because I swear I remember hearing grandmother called. I know on the dispatch it was, mom called, then Dawn called. So this is really interesting because Dawn calls too. Dawn reports it. Candace reports it. Did Grandma Candy report it? If somebody knows that already, let me know. I just can't remember hearing that. I just know that Candace used her mom's phone because the other one wasn't working or something. The fact that majority of calls to police were made by those primary offenders presents investigators with a valuable opportunity from a statement analysis perspective. And that's why they won't release the actual 911 call, because they're holding it. That is a valuable tool for them, especially into evidence, because over time, their conflicting stories or legitimate stories is going to be compared to that. We all know that. So through the collection of 911 recordings, investigators have the benefit of hearing firsthand recital of the incident, and the analysis of the 911 call recordings can potentially provide them with insight and interviewing strategies, right? That's why they won't release it. But after 3 years, I would think it's time. But that's just me. We want to hear it. So that might be a selfish request, right? But it helps solve those cases, to help solve them. But that's why I'm saying it should be released, because they're not solved. It's been 3 years. All right. The other stuff is crucially important that I want to get into about Summer. As of where it stands right now in this statistical comparison between false alleged abductions, I'm thinking that the statistics are a little high. But we have more to do, y'all. We have more to do. And everyone is innocent until proven guilty by a court of law. There has been no charges brought upon these parents. Summer Wells is still missing. Anything is still on the table. No stone left unturned, as they say. So we'll continue on the next time, on the next live. Let me know what you think in the comments of this information. I'd love your opinion. Because she's worth it. Summer Wells is worth conjecture, scrutiny, and all of those things that we do on this platform. But there is a professional and respectful way to go about it. All right, guys. Thank you for being here. You know, as I say, hit that like button before you leave. Drink your water, hug yourself, babies, fur babies, grandbabies. Share Summer Wells information to this day. You never know where or when it could help. Have a good one, guys. Bye.